Mini jam tarts, so delicious. Stay tuned for the how-to. Right, let's get making the pastry. So simple to make pastry. Honestly, I have not bought shop-made shortcrust pastry for a long time. That's how easy this is to make. So we're going to start with some plain flour. I'm using a food processor. You can do it by hand. If you don't have a food processor, you can just rub it in with your fingers. But I'm using a food processor because it's way quicker and I'm lazy and I don't want to get my hands dirty. So into my food processor, I'm popping my plain flour and some icing sugar. Now, a lot of people will actually use caster sugar instead of icing sugar. I prefer icing sugar because I find that it gets blended up really well and I get a nice mixture then at the end of it. To my flour and my icing sugar, I'm going to add my butter. This is unsalted butter. Let's get all that in, cubed. And it is cold because when you work with pastry, it's always important to keep it as cold as you can. Even though it's going in the fridge after, it's important to keep it really cold. And my last ingredient going in is egg yolks. I've got 2 egg yolks here. Obviously, it depends on the quantity. I'll put all the quantities for this below this video so you can have a look and replicate it yourself. There's my egg yolks. So that's all my ingredients into my food processor. Put the lid on. And all I'm going to do is mix it up until it's just combined. It'll start coming together very quickly. Now, it shouldn't take too long for it to come together. Right, let's have a check of it. Pretty good. That's what you're looking for. That kind of crumbly. It's gone a bit yellow because of the egg yolk and the butter, but it's all mixed up. There's no big lumps in there. Now, because we're making a pastry, I obviously want this to come together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop my lid back on and take this bit off, and I'm going to put a bit of cold water, just a spoonful at a time, just to bring the pastry together. That is all I want to do. So I'm going to turn it on while I do it, and I'm just going to pour it in and watch it come together. Right, you don't want to do too much because otherwise your pastry becomes sticky. So you want to bring it together so that it looks like it will stick. That might need a little bit more water. So if I pull a bit out, you can see how it's sticking together, but it's still quite crumbly. So I'm going to put a little bit more water in just to help bring it all together. Right, so that was probably about 1.5 tablespoons of water. You can use anything from 1 tablespoon to 3, depends on your flour and how it all absorbs. And all I'm going to do now, it's still crumbly in there. It's still crumbly in there, you can see. But what I'm going to do is I've got a bit of cling film here. I'm going to tip it all out onto my cling film and then squish it together into one big blob of dough. Now this is the messy bit, but I've managed to not be too messy so far. Right, let's move that so you can see what I'm doing. And all I'm going to do now, you can see it's all still really crumbly, but parts of it have stuck together. So I'm just going to use the cling film to help me just squish it all together. And I should be able to make it into a lovely squished up. So I will open this in a minute to make sure it is properly together. But that was relatively not messy at all. So I've already got one that I made earlier that has been in the fridge. So this one is now going to go in my freezer. And I'm going to bring out the one that I made earlier to show you how to do jam tarts. That's it. That's the pastry. Simple as. See you shortly. Right, so this is the one that I made earlier and it's been in my fridge for just under an hour. So it's lovely and cool to touch and you want it a bit firmer. You can see there that it's quite firm. So I don't like to roll out the whole lot in one go. You could do, absolutely, but I'm going to break it up into smaller chunks and do them instead. So I'll keep that aside for now. So on my work surface, I'm just going to do a sprinkling of flour. And then I'm going to get rolling. So to roll this out, once I've rolled it out, I will be cutting it with a pastry cutter and putting it in I've got a mini cupcake liner there. Just make sure, a little tip when you roll pastry out, that you have floured the top just a little so your rolling pin doesn't stick, or else you'll get little pockets where the rolling pin is stuck to the pastry. But it's also important to keep moving your pastry around or it'll stick to your table. Okay, so my pastry is pretty much rolled out. I like to make sure that it's nice and even, fairly thin. You need to have it thick enough that it's not going to break on you as you lift it. So I've got my cutter. I'm going to use a fluted cutter because I like the edges to look a bit crinkled, but you can absolutely use a plain one too if you want. Just for reference, I always make sure that my cutter is slightly bigger than the hole of whatever tin I'm using, so then it's got room to go up the sides a little bit. Okay, and all I'm going to do is I'm just going to stamp a whole bunch out, and then I'm going to put them in my tray. And once you have got all the ones that you can from this batch, you can absolutely re-roll your pastry and just roll it out again, bring your pastry back together, re-roll it, and just keep cutting as many as you need. So you can see how thick it is. The thicker your pastry is, the longer it'll take to cook in the oven. So it's obviously important to not get it too thick if you can help it, or you'll end up with raw pastry. So mine's fairly thin. You can see it's maybe the thickness of, I don't know, a 50p coin or so. So maybe 2 millimeters, 3 millimeters thick. And the other thing that's really important to remember as well is if you overhandle your pastry dough, it's going to make it go tough. So you don't want to keep squishing it up and re-rolling it lots of times, or it's just not going to taste as nice. It's going to be really tough and not a flaky and crumbly pastry like you want your short crust to be. So all I do when I put my pastry out is I lay it over the top. I shall show you. I lay it over the top, and I actually use the end of my rolling pin because my rolling pin is the perfect size for my mini cupcake cases. So I use the end of my rolling pin just to get it to go in perfectly in the middle. So I just position the rolling pin right in the middle of the pastry and then push it down, and it means that I've got a perfect case which has been pushed all the way into the corners. That's all my pastry cases done. So now I'm going to pop some jam into each of those. So I have, because I like variety, I've got a few different jams here. So this one is apricot jam. You can use your favourite jams. You could make your own if that's what you like to do. Bear in mind with the jam, as you put jam in, that it will bubble up in the oven. So it might so if you overfill your jam, if you fill it to the top, it might bubble over and go onto your pastry and onto your baking tray as well. So I tend to fill it about halfway up the pastry case, just to try and help it not, so it looks nice and tidy so you can see the pastry around it when it comes out as well. This is our blackberry jam. It's actually thickened up quite a lot more than I wanted it to, but this was our blackberry jam from last year's berry picking. So easy to make jam, and it is so good. And my final one is going to be strawberry jam. Strawberry jam really reminds me of summer, so I do like that. Reminds me of what's coming. There we go, that's my jams done, and I've just got a few more stars to put on top. 3 more stars. Now 2 more stars. And of course, my children will want to eat the pastry on its own as well. Last star going on. So my oven has been preheating on 140 degrees. I'm gonna go pop these in, and I will see you on the other side when these come out. In the meantime, while they're baking, I'm gonna enjoy a game with my daughter. See you soon. I win! So these have just come out of the oven. They smell amazing. They will, when you pull them out, the jam will be very, very runny. It'll be very liquidy. But as soon as you pull it out, give it a couple of minutes and you'll see the jam will start to set. It looks absolutely beautiful. It smells wonderful. Please, please do remember that hot jam will burn you. It is really, really hot. What I would do now is I would leave them in there to cool for a few more minutes, and then I would take them out and put them on my cooling rack to cool completely before we eat them. I don't know if I said these cook for about 15 minutes in my oven. So it was at 140. They've been in there about 15 minutes and they've just started to, if you look at the pastry, you will see it has just started to brown around the edges, and that's exactly how I like it, where it's just started to go golden. And that is it, simple as that. Leave them to cool in there for about 10 minutes, just so that the jam is not too hot and you're not going to burn yourself when you get it out. And then all I do is I use a knife to just help ease it out and put it on a cooling rack to cool completely. These are so good with a cup of tea or however you want to eat them as a little snack. The kids love them and they are all homemade and gorgeous. I hope you've enjoyed this video. We'll see you next time.